You know what's crazy? This dude won Jeopardy twice, worked as a nuclear engineer, and thought he was smart enough to get away with murder. In 1994, Paul Curry poisoned his wife with nicotine, collected $500,000 in insurance, and just bounced to Kansas. For 16 years, this guy's living his best life thinking he beat the system. New wife, new job, probably watching CSI thinking amateurs. Then one day in 2010, cops knock on his door like, remember that murder from the 90s? The look on his face must have been priceless. You know what's crazy about this case? This dude didn't just wake up one day and decide to poison his wife. He planned this thing from the moment they met. Paul Curry meets Linda in 1989 while they're both working at a nuclear power plant. This 32-year-old Mensa member and two-time Jeopardy champion is basically the definition of too smart for his own good. The guy had the brains to win on a game show that most of us would bomb on, but instead of using that intelligence for something productive, he decided to become the world's worst husband. So check this out. Within a month of their marriage in 1992, Curry starts showing behavior that would make any normal person run for the hills. He's suddenly demanding that everything they own needs to be put in his name. The mortgage, his name, bank accounts, his name. And then comes the kicker. He insists on a massive $1 million life insurance policy on Linda's life. But when she suggests he get one too, he's like, nah, I'm good. I mean, come on, man, could you be any more obvious? But here's where his genius really comes into play. When Linda questioned this weird financial arrangement, Curry used his perceived intelligence like a weapon. He basically leveraged his Jeopardy-winning brain to convince her that these were just smart financial moves for their future together. Like, trust me, honey, I'm the smart one here. I know what I'm doing. And Linda, completely under his spell, agreed to all of it. While all this financial manipulation is happening, Linda discovers something that should have sent her running. This dude had multiple previous marriages he never told her about. And that's not even the worst part. She finds out he has a child he never mentioned to her. A whole human child. And to make matters worse, he wasn't even paying child support for this kid he pretended didn't exist. Like, how many red flags do you need? But here's the truly sad part. Instead of packing her bags and getting the hell away from this walking disaster of a human being, Linda stayed. She was completely enamored with his charm and that big brain of his. The same intelligence that helped him win on Jeopardy was now helping him manipulate the woman who loved him. With Linda firmly under his control and that life insurance policy in place, Curry begins executing his horrific plan. This isn't some crime of passion. This is calculated murder. He starts by mixing small doses of nicotine into homemade salad dressings. Think about how messed up that is. The man is literally poisoning his wife during dinner. He chose nicotine because he thought it would be untraceable, allowing him to gradually build up toxins in her system until her body just couldn't take it anymore. But Curry gets impatient when his slow poisoning method isn't working fast enough. So what does our genius decide to do? He escalates to tampering with her IV bags during her hospital stays. The woman is already sick in the hospital, likely from his previous poisoning attempts, and this monster is sneaking around adding poison to her medical equipment. The calculated nature of it all shows just how far this man was willing to go for a payday. The final act of his twisted plan is almost too disturbing to believe. After sedating Linda with sleeping pills, Curry administers what would become the fatal dose. An injection of nicotine so massive that it measured 50 to 100 times higher than what you'd find in even a heavy smoker's blood. In one calculated moment, he ends her life and sets himself up to collect on that $1 million policy he'd manipulated her into getting. After murdering his wife with a massive nicotine injection, what does a so-called genius like Paul Curry do next? While most killers get caught within days or weeks, this Jeopardy champion somehow managed to build an entirely new life and live as a free man for 16 years, all while $400,000 of blood money sat in his bank account. What's wild is how completely normal his getaway plan was. No elaborate identity change or fleeing to a non-extradition country. Nope, this dude just moved to Kansas. That's it. After cashing in on the life insurance policy and splitting the money with Linda's sister, which by the way is a brilliant move to make yourself look less suspicious, He packed his bags and headed for the Midwest, where absolutely nobody was looking for him. The craziest part, Curry didn't go into hiding or live off the grid. He got himself a totally boring government job as a building code inspector. Like, can you think of a more under-the-radar occupation? This man who calculated a methodical poisoning murder was now just telling people their porches weren't up to code. He even remarried and settled into regular suburban life like he hadn't just killed someone for money. Meanwhile, back in California, Linda's case was literally gathering dust on a shelf. The initial investigation hit a wall because the technology just wasn't there yet. They suspected something was off about her death, but without solid forensic evidence, what could they really do? The perfect crime isn't always about elaborate schemes. Sometimes it's just about committing murder before science catches up. But here's where Curry's luck ran out. In 2002, a sheriff's sergeant with an obsessive eye for detail started digging through cold cases. When he landed on Linda's file, all those red flags that had been overlooked suddenly came into focus. Why was her husband always with her during her hospital stays? Why did he take out that massive insurance policy right after they got married? The detective must have felt like he was reading a murder mystery where the killer might as well have signed his work. For the next 4 years, this detective basically dedicated his life to solving Linda's case. He tracked down witnesses who hadn't been properly interviewed, dug through evidence that had been collected but never fully analyzed, and started building the case that should have been built years earlier. It was like watching someone solve a jigsaw puzzle that everyone else had given up on. The real breakthrough came in 2006 when modern toxicology tests confirmed what had been impossible to prove back in the 90s. Linda had been murdered. And not just murdered, but poisoned with a nicotine dose 50 to 100 times higher than what would be in a regular smoker's blood. Science had finally caught up with Paul Curry's perfect crime. The detective didn't waste any time. He tracked Curry down in Kansas, where this dude had been living his best life thinking he was completely in the clear. Imagine the shock on Curry's face when investigators showed up at his door 16 years after the murder. This man had been checking his rearview mirror for so long that he probably stopped looking years ago. And then, during questioning, Curry made the kind of mistake that even non-geniuses know to avoid. He confirmed he was alone with Linda the night she died. Game over. With modern forensic evidence showing she was murdered by nicotine poisoning, and Curry placing himself as the only person at the scene, the case was essentially closed. For all his supposed intelligence, he handed investigators the final puzzle piece they needed. 20 years after Linda's murder, justice finally caught up to Paul Curry in 2014. The jury wasn't playing around. They found him guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances and tacked on insurance fraud for good measure. It took 16 years, but this so-called genius couldn't outsmart the system forever. As prosecutor Ibrahim Baytier pointed out, we had a very smart jury that went through all the evidence and kept thinking that for 16 years, he was enjoying the fact that, in his mind, he thought he got away with murder. Linda's friend Bruce Brandt summed it up perfectly. This is really about Linda and what a beautiful person she was. We can't bring her back, but at least some justice is here now that he has to pay and think about her for the rest of his life. Makes you wonder how many other killers are out there right now, thinking they've gotten away with the perfect crime, not realizing that science is constantly evolving, and detectives aren't giving up. I'm just saying, if you're planning to murder someone for insurance money, maybe reconsider your life choices.